Today we're going to talk about a little bit about, as much as we can for an hour, the decision maker, what that looks like, what that means, what that feels like. Um, the I think I have it down here. I don't know if people can see that. Share screen. Share screen. Nope.
Oh, darn.
Yeah, I see something. Heaven, God, Christ, knowledge, oneness.
You do see all that. Somehow, for us, it disappeared.
I see about half of it anyway.
That's good.
There you go.
Yeah, cool. So anyway, the gist is there's three parts of this internal place, this internal part of us that the Course calls the mind. There's the ego part, the Course talks about a lot. Then there's the Holy Spirit part of the mind, which is synonymous with the right mind or forgiveness. And then finally, there's the part of the mind that, for lack of a better phrase, Wapnick called the decision maker, which is the part of us that chooses between the ego or the Holy Spirit. And it's really this that's the central focus of the Course. The Course isn't really about getting back to heaven. It's not about, it is ultimately about choosing the Holy Spirit and eventually getting back to heaven. But the real gist of it is everything in the Course is addressed to and aimed at us becoming aware that we are decision makers in any given moment. That there's some part of us that's consistently and constantly choosing between the ego or the Holy Spirit. And that's what our quote unquote true identity is in the separation. That's where the Course is always trying to get us to get back to that place where we actually chose the ego over the Holy Spirit, and then continue to do that. And part of that whole dynamic was always not to admit that's what we were doing. So whenever we're choosing ego in any given moment, it's always like the whole purpose of choosing ego and then projecting it out is so that we don't even realize that's what we're doing. My experience has been, and I think this is true, that when we choose the Holy Spirit, it's a real conscious, in the moment, aware thing of what's going on. And basically choosing the Holy Spirit, from the Course's point of view, is when I actively choose against the ego. Like I realize I am choosing the ego. I admit how terrible that is. I don't want to do that anymore. And so I'm willing to listen to another voice. And the only other voice in the mind is the Holy Spirit. So this idea of the decision maker, it sounds like an intellectual concept, but it really is the gist of the entire Course, is for us to get back to that, not just to get back to our minds, because the mind could be really dark if all we're seeing is ego, but that there's a place in us that's actually choosing to see that darkness, choosing to see the ego and then project it out. Do you have anything you want to say about that?
Yeah. I always have something to say. But, as I'm looking at this diagram, the line above where it says ego, decision maker, Holy Spirit, what I want to do is point out that you can't choose the ego. You can't choose the Holy Spirit from the perspective of the ego. It's an impossibility. So it becomes really important to understand what it's like to stand as the decision maker, so you don't confuse choosing from the ego's point of view, which often we do. We look at the ego with the ego. So I would on this diagram make the decision maker a little bit higher up and understand that the decision maker stands before any ego thought occurred, and it originally chose the ego. So now we need to stand before all thought and choose the Holy Spirit. So it really is a place of awareness without any judgment. It's that place of looking with Jesus, say, where there aren't any thoughts in my mind. There's just pure awareness. And from that place, I can look and decide, is it going to be the ego or is it going to be the Holy Spirit? So I don't know whether that makes any distinction for anybody, but it does for me. I think we have to come to that place within our mind and get real familiar with it and get comfortable with it. It's just a place of pure awareness, and that's the point at which we decided. We're always in the same moment that we were originally, which the only moment there is the moment that we chose the ego, and we're still in that same moment, only now we get to choose the Holy Spirit. So there's really only one instant in time. There aren't a bunch of instants in time. We're still caught in that same instant in time, and we're always choosing which way to go. So that's just a thought.
Can I ask you a question, both of you? I've been listening to the Rules for Decision, and I keep replaying the beginning of the first CD because Kim talks a lot about, how we're always making a decision, either the ego or the Holy Spirit thought system, that we're continuously ongoing making that choice. And he talked about setting a set so that, I guess what that means is you do it so much it just becomes more natural. I'm not sure. And that's one thing. And then the second thing is, it's been a progression for me, because I used to have someone that I was angry or upset or thing or something, but I keep thinking about all the thoughts that come into my mind. And I've been saying that is an ego thought. That is from the Holy Spirit. Most of the time it's an ego thought, fear, anxiety, judgment, something. But it's not a specific event or person. And what I've been doing, because I don't know exactly what to do when I get any kind of thoughts like that, walking the dog, something that comes up that's definitely not from the Holy Spirit or God. Am I asking, just bringing to Jesus the idea of anxiety or my thoughts that are going on? Is that what he means by making a set? I really am not sure.
Yeah, I think what he's alluding to there, a practice begins to develop, in which you begin to recognize when you're making the wrong choice or the wrong decision, and you become more and more aware. So I think a set, the way he's using it, is an awareness really begins to develop in you, which makes the practice more obvious to you, and you're more alert to that practice. Does that make any sense? You're muted, Linda.
Yeah. Yes, that does make some more sense. And again, the thoughts that come up, the things that will come into my mind are, minute little stupid things and it's not making me upset, but but I'm judging. I'm putting a label on something, and I'll just ask to see that differently. Is that, instead of going through the 3 steps on a specific event or person, it seems like it's all the time. I'm always thinking, and I keep thinking about what Ken says. I'm choosing the ego thought system. I mean, it's there, and does it just evolve?
It's a slow process. I mean, we're used to choosing the ego, and the ego's fighting for its life. Once you have the awareness that you are the decision maker and you're standing in that place before thought, before time and space ever was, that place, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the truth, where there's no judgment, where there's no evaluation, and then boom, there are thoughts that arise, and the real question is going to be whether you identify with those thoughts, or whether
identify with those thoughts.
Identify with them. You make them real, and you make them real by saying, "Oh, that was a bad thought, Linda."
Yeah.
That's an identification with the thought, rather than, "Oh, I chose." I made a decision and chose to identify with the thought. So the problem isn't even the thought. If you just saw the thought and let it go, wouldn't be a problem. But when you identify with it, it becomes the way the ego preserves itself.
Okay, now I got that. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
So, we talk about this intellectually, but it really helps to just have it even now. We can do a meditation, and there's a CD set. It's called The Decision Maker. Imagine that. And let me get this. And in the Decision Maker, it's just a 2 CD set. Came out in 2007. Ken talks about a couple of the 200 lessons that apply to this decision-making process. And one of them is lesson 236. So we'll do that as a meditation. It's on page 410 in the workbook, lesson 236.
410.
So we really want, like the workbook is trying to get us to have, an actual experience of this decision maker. It kind of, talking about it, seeing it on a chart kind of gives us a map of how to get there. But then if we're not willing to actually go there, use the map, then it just becomes an intellectual process. So in lesson 236, the title is I Rule My Mind, which I alone must rule. And what he's saying there is that's just a given fact. Like I was saying before, when we choose the ego, we rule our mind with the ego, we totally forget we're doing that, because then we have to project it out. And now we're saying the reason I'm in all this angst or the reason I'm judging is because obviously look what's going on out there. Mm-hmm. But we're just totally disconnected from the fact that I rule my mind. I chose the ego, and until I undo that, I'm always going to be having to judge something out there as the reason for my pain, the reason for my fear, the reason for whatever angst it is I'm feeling. That's just the huge setup. So I rule my mind, but when I choose the ego, I don't realize that's what's going on. And so he's trying to get us to have a conscious experience as a decision maker of admitting it's possible that I'm actually choosing to certainly react to all these things externally the way I don't think I'm actually choosing to react that way. It seems like I just am reacting that way, obviously, because look what they did. So I'll read lesson 236. We'll get quiet for a minute or two. Allow ourselves to have that experience of admitting that as a possibility, and then being willing to also allow the Holy Spirit to speak to us, to experience what we truly are. I rule my mind, which I alone must rule. I have a kingdom, my mind, I must rule. At times it does not seem I am its king at all. It seems to triumph over me and tell me what to think and what to do and what to feel. And yet it has been given me, by me, to serve whatever purpose I perceive in it. My mind can only serve. It serves the ego or it serves the Holy Spirit. So today, in this moment, I give my mind's service to the Holy Spirit to employ as He sees fit. I thus direct my mind, which I alone can rule, and thus I set it free to do the will of God. Father, my mind is open to your thoughts and closed today to every thought but yours. I rule my mind. I offer it to you. Accept my gift, for it is yours to me. And gently come back. It's about time, Jeannie.
Yes. I forget with the 10 o'clock, 9:30.
Yeah, we did that just to confuse you. We made them all 9:30 now, right?
Oh, golly.
9:30. Just get that in your head, nothing else.
Yes. Okay.
We're talking about Jeannie's decision maker and where it went wrong. And there's only one place in the course where it mentions Jeannie's decision maker. And that's in the manual. It actually uses the phrase, but it's not quite the way Ken's talking about it. So on the manual, page 17, at the bottom of page 17 in the manual, I believe it's paragraph 1. The entire page actually ends with the phrase, the decision maker. And here he's just simply pointing out that we always believe our bodies are the decision maker. As healthy egos, we project this whole decision-making process onto our bodies, and we think we're choosing between things all the time. I want eggs for breakfast instead of cereal. I want a job I like instead of a job I don't like. I want a job, period. I don't want a job. In time and space, we're making those kind of decisions as bodies, and as well, it's true, we should. I mean, we have to in order to survive, in order to function, and in order to keep as healthy a body as we think we can. And then, but he's trying to get us to look at that all that body stuff is simply a decision that we're making in the mind, and it's whether I'm making that decision on how to use my body with the ego and not admitting it, meaning I'm identifying with the body and I believe everything I'm feeling has something to do with the body, or I'm willing to step up above it all, like Lynn was talking about, into this awareness that the Holy Spirit is constantly, or Jesus is constantly telling me that your body and my body is not what we are. And am I willing to have that experience? Am I willing to even step out of my body stuff and my identification with the body and have an experience where I actually am aware of that? It's almost like an out of a body thing, except we're sitting in the body doing it, or that's what it seems like. So in paragraph 1 at the bottom, line 6, he's talking about sickness in the body. He says, if sickness in the body is a decision, it is the mind and not the body that makes it. Anything we do with the body, it's always the mind and not the body that makes that decision. And then he goes on, the resistance to realizing this, recognizing this, is enormous, because the entire existence of the world as we perceive it depends on the body being the decision maker. Meaning my whole identity has to be so wrapped up in the body that I never realize I have a mind, much less a voice called the Holy Spirit that could tell me all this is simply made up. So that's why the world is so important to our identification as egos, because it keeps the responsibility for what we're feeling always outside of us, always outside of us. So if I'm taking a walk and I'm having nagging judgmental thoughts about seemingly little stuff, that's as much a classroom as when the big stuff kicks in and I'm freaking out about something big. I mean, the little stuff doesn't look like it's that big, but I mean, it's so consistent and so continuous that until I'm willing to take any classroom I'm in that second, and like Linda was saying, I think, was ask Jesus to help me look at this a different way. And the different way is always simply, oh, maybe I'm not this thing that's feeling this. Maybe whatever reaction I'm having in this moment has nothing to do with anything external at all. It's just something I'm making up. So I stay preoccupied with believing I'm a body, believing I'm at the mercy of all this external stuff. Even my own body, I'm at the mercy of that and what it's making me feel. So to be able to move in awareness out of that place to a different place is the decision-making experience we want to have. On the next page, he says, terms like instincts, he's talking about the body now, terms like body instincts, reflexes, and the like represent attempts to endow the body with non-mental motivators. Meaning, I say, well, you know, like, of course my body's reacting to the heat because that's just a natural body instinct to react to that. Of course my body's reacting emotionally to some external situation. That's what my body does. Well, yeah, it does that, but it does that because we set the whole thing up to do it that way.
So there's a thought that the body has a mind of its own.
A brain of it, yeah. Right.
The body's got its own mind,
Right.
but the body doesn't have its own mind. And the mind does not live in the body. The body is in the mind, but the mind doesn't live in the body.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny because even from this reference, this point of view, and it's totally normal, we do this all the time, we talk about my mind is doing this. Well, it's really, the body is doing what the mind wants it to do. The mind has a body, the body doesn't have a mind.
And there's no exception to that. So, you know, it's amazing how often we, even as long-term course students, think that the body is telling us something about ourselves. Like it craves this or it craves that, it wants this, it wants that. No, it doesn't. It starts with a decision in the mind to be distracted and believe that something outside of us can affect us. No exceptions.
I know that if I took a written test, I really believe I could ace it, get a good A on it. But when it comes to practicing it, I can't do it real well, it seems, 100% of the time. But I catch myself faster and faster. And yesterday, for me, an atomic bomb went off because I was very upset with the use my different neighbors are making of my fence. And having lived here for 47 years,
Whoa.
there have been multiple neighbors cycling through. And
They're buried in your backyard? No.
we've worked through different difficulties with them. And now I'm to the point where it's like, okay, now my husband's not, my darling Robert crossed over. So he's not the one bringing something to my awareness of what the neighbors are doing to our fence. I'm aware of it. I did really well. I felt I was in a state of grace for a long time yesterday. And then I went out to snip weeds along the fence. And I thought a lot of all kinds of correct things to get me to shift out of that because I wanted to let the distress go. Well, it was after midnight. I woke up and something said to put on the CDs for Rules for Decisions, which I think Linda mentioned. So I started listening. I listened for a couple hours last night. And then when I woke up this morning, I felt the release. And I listened for another couple hours. And I am just so grateful for this because before, a longer time ago, I could stay in the grips of distress and hug it to me for, seemed like forever. Really, really be upset. Not be willing to just let go. And it's all right. But I also understand that when I stay in that very, very peaceful, loving, quiet place, if I can stay there, allow myself to stay there for a long time, the longer I can do that, the quieter, my world is. And if something happens that is not especially to my liking, I don't really care. It's all right. Everything is all right.
Yeah.
I know the difference when I'm in a state, when I'm living with that state of grace. And sometimes it happens so subtly that I'll be like, oh.
Mm-hmm.
And other times it happens, it's in a very pronounced way, and I'm, oh, thank you. Because I feel the release. I've let go of the nonsense, the silliness.
Yeah, Linda and I were talking the other day about how we typically think that we're in a state of peace when everything's going our way. And when we've gotten a day where everything's going our way, we call that peace. And that would be, the Bliss Ninnies version of peace is everything's like that song from Oklahoma, everything's going my way, there's a bright golden haze on the meadow and, the birds are singing and chirping and the rabbits are running across the lawn. And we think that's the state of peace. And what you're pointing out is there's a state before that is peaceful, that can't be disturbed by anything. If you want to hold on to it. But remember, the first obstacle to peace and the obstacles to peace is the desire to get rid of it. Well, who wants to get rid of it? It's the ego that wants to get rid of it. It's the ego that throws it away. And we throw it away not even knowing that we did it. So that's why the Course always says, if I'm not at peaceful, it's because I decided wrongly. It isn't I'm not peaceful because of what the neighbors did. I'm not peaceful because I made a decision prior to that to throw peace away. So we're always the decision maker as to our state of awareness and how we feel. It's never coming from anything external.
Because there isn't anything external.
Yeah, there isn't.
Isn't anything external. And I can say that and look at what the neighbors are doing. And if I am not in that quiet place, oh, it's like an atomic bomb goes off with my emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So I really do understand what Ken Wapnick says when we can be fearful because a war's starting up and our troops are mobilizing, or we can just have a tiny disquieting thought. It's all an atomic bomb going off. So we can become aware and notice what the heck is going on.
Mhm.
And it's not out there.
Yeah.
Just want to remember this.
The metaphor of fences
Dave had his hand up too.
is interesting because in the what is the body section in the workbook, he calls the body a fence that we put around our mind to kind of cut us off from our brother's mind. And that, of course, that gets played out in cars and houses and actual literal fences. In that movie Fences with Denzel Washington, the movie's called Fences, and there's a running theme that they're trying to build a fence around the house in that play. And so it's, and of course it becomes a metaphorical, they're talking about the family and the relationships, the fence he's got himself around himself, separated from his wife, separated from his son, and vice versa. So it's really about the fences we use. We use the body as a fence to keep away our brother because we identify with that body, with that fence. Go ahead, Dave. You had something?
Well, have you finished your thought?
Yeah.
I don't want to interrupt. I mean, I'm not trying to be,
No, go ahead.
Okay. Well, let's see. In this whole kind of taking responsibility for being the decision maker, I find that I get, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of overwhelmed with the volume of ego stuff that that is showing up. And then it's kind of like being, let's see, I don't know, in a position where you're fending off. I kind of lose my, I don't know exactly. I feel like I'm fighting. I'm on a sinking ship, with all these rats, kind of climbing over me. Those being the ego thoughts, and I'm wondering. What seems to work really well for me is a sense of trust, and if I can instead of engaging the ego and putting the weight of, and the words may not be right, but maybe we can thrash this out together. The weight of the responsibility of always choosing against the ego. I find that if I just rest in a state of trust, that I don't have to engage the ego thinking process so much and constantly be going, okay, I want to choose Holy Spirit. Okay, I want to choose Holy Spirit. Okay, I want to choose Holy Spirit. It's just, these things just kind of come and come and come. So do you have anything you can say about that?
You're bringing up a really, really important point, and I'm so glad that you did, because we can get caught up in the minutia of our projections. Oh, this thought, that thought, this thought, that thought. And the ego loves that kind of thing.
Yep.
The real issue that needs to be undone is guilt. And where guilt gets undone is by our relationship with our brother. And so what makes a teacher of God? Manual for teachers. What makes a teacher of God is recognizing shared interests. the desire we have to join with our brother, to find the place of joining and join with our brother in recognizing my brother and I have the same interest. We want the same thing. And that is my sole commitment as a teacher of God, is to recognize that and want that to be my experience. Now, I don't know how to, like Jesus says, we go together or not at all. Over and over, he's telling us we cannot recognize ourselves without our brother. And that if we are willing to recognize our brother and ourselves are one, and we have the same interests, that's our part. The Holy Spirit will indeed show us that that's true. We will have an experience of the truth of that because we're choosing not to separate. We're choosing to recognize our oneness. And in that, it's like choosing the Holy Spirit as our teacher. So as guilt gets undone, we rest more in that quiet place of not wanting to attack. We lose the urge to attack. And in losing that, our minds will become more peaceful, and we won't be caught up in the minutia of every single thought that gets projected. So it makes it a lot simpler. In the Rules for Decision, he says, how does a teacher of God spend his day? The teacher spends his day in touch with the answer, in touch with the Holy Spirit. Yep. And he recognizes then that every encounter is a holy encounter. So that's what's going to bring us peace and guilt in the mind. And so I think the point you brought up is very good. Really be aware of your relationships throughout the day. And are you recognizing shared interests rather than trying to watch every single thought that goes through your mind?
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense, yes. There's one more little question. I can feel it back here, but it doesn't have words yet. So I'll get back to you.
All right.
I wanted to look at, he doesn't use the word decision maker, but only one time, and that's in relationship to, we believe that the body is the decision maker. Like we were looking at, he does use the phrase, it's an interesting phrase, it's the mechanism of decision. He calls the mind that in two different places. And so it's kind of another way of, instead of saying decision maker, mechanism of decision. The first one's on page 145 in the text, 145. And he's really talking about the mind, and that is the mechanism of decision. Page 145 in the text, paragraph 5. If you look down, let's see.
It's 7.
Line 7. Your mind, not your body. Your mind is the means by which you determine your own condition. So internally, the condition is, am I separate? Am I in fear? Am I not feeling peaceful? Or am I feeling peaceful? Am I feeling not fearful? Am I feeling not angry? So those are the two main conditions, period. Because mind is the mechanism of decision. It is the power, the mind is the power by which we separate or join, and accordingly, we experience pain or joy. My decision cannot overcome yours. Jesus is saying that that's where free will, this whole idea of free will comes in, is you have to decide, we have to decide ourselves which teacher we want to follow. So his decision cannot overcome ours. His decision to hear the Holy Spirit cannot overcome our decision to hear the ego, because that decision is as powerful as mine. One of the consistently resounding themes in the Course is this power of the mind to choose between the two. And then if we choose the ego, we project a whole world out, and then we actually believe we're bodies in it. So that's a pretty powerful mind, not only to do that, but to convince ourselves that that's what we actually are. That's how good we are at this stuff. So to go back to the mind and actually realize that, have an experience, that's what's going on, and that we can choose something else. The other place he uses it, this mechanism of decision, is in page 222 in the text. I think it's paragraph 9. Page 222, paragraph 9 in the text. And he's talking about, once again, if you go down to line 8 in paragraph 9, yet this world is only in the mind of its maker, along with his real salvation. So there's the ego part of us that's projecting a world, and all this is happening in the ego part of our mind. Or there's the Holy Spirit part of us that's looking at the tiny mad idea and saying all this is silly. So don't believe that this thing we're in, this world, is outside of ourselves. This is happening right now in our minds. Certainly not in our brains, which is a part of the whole problem. But this is all actually going on within our mind. Mm-hmm. Or only by recognizing where it is, that we do have a mind, and that's what's really happening, will we gain control over it. Meaning that way I can willingly look at it, look at the guilt, the relentless guilt. It's not so much all the minutia that's constantly coming at us, but the problem is all of that minutia that's constantly coming up at us, we have a finger pointed at somebody that's causing it. So it's the guilt that's running all the minutia. All the minutia just has just the purpose of saying, if it weren't for that minutia, I'd be okay. So the guilt isn't mine, it's always the minutia. So it's just this endless stream of minutia coming at us that's overwhelming, but it's the guilt that's driving that. I don't want to look at the guilt, the internal guilt that I'm feeling about pushing Jesus out of my awareness right here and now in this second. And now I'm preoccupied with all the minutia that's coming at me. And I say, that's why I'm freaking out. Mm-hmm. That's why I'm in pain. That's why I'm afraid. That's why I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. Because it will. I mean, things will eventually fall apart in time and space. But all that is simply made up. So I don't admit that if I let Jesus be in my awareness, because I'm sitting in the mind right this second. We're all sitting in the mind. You know, Jesus didn't go anywhere. That's that whole idea of footprints in the sand. When you know, like, where did you go, Jesus? Well, I was always there. I was carrying you, but you didn't know it. So the gist of that is, in any given moment, I can take the minutia, look at the guilt that I'm generating, look at the finger pointing I'm doing about that, and then go, maybe I don't want to do that anymore. If that's what's really going on, maybe I don't want to keep on pointing the finger. Maybe I'm willing to allow this presence of Jesus to begin to dawn on me, that he's right here, right now, in this second. And it's allowing that. We were watching Mooji last night. And Mooji's this guru, and he kind of takes you to this place of the mind so that you have this experience that all of this stuff that's happening isn't who we truly are. And his way of doing it is, he says, leave your personhood at the door. Come in. Just like leave your past at the door. Leave who you think you are at the door. Leave what you think you're going to be worried about tomorrow at the door, and just come in and sit in this empty place. Well, the Course's approach is to take the very things that are driving us crazy and look at them from the point of view of, what if I'm not upset for the reason I think? What if all this crazy stuff is just a huge setup? And am I willing to look beyond that setup and have an experience of something else? So Mooji leaves it at the door. Jesus says the way the Course works, and both are valid systems, I think. The way the Course works is you take the very minutia you think is driving you crazy, and you just simply say, what if I'm not upset for the reason I think? Am I willing to have an experience right now in this second of a presence that knows that's true? Jesus, Holy Spirit, Buddha, whatever you want to call it, but there's a presence that's in my mind, in our mind collectively, right this second, that knows that all this is simply not what we are. And am I willing to access that? And it doesn't take a huge leap of faith to try it. Because, I mean, it's just, if that is the reality, it's just like flipping a switch. Okay, I'll turn the light on, and I'll suddenly have an experience, the computer and the camera and these bodies that I see on the screen and sitting here ain't who we are. And even more importantly, all those images were being generated by this thought that I don't want to feel the desire to get rid of peace. Are these fences? Or is this belief in these bodies that we believe are causing us pain?
Are separate. Yeah. So if I've chosen, a good way to look at it is in every encounter with my brother, if I'm not seeing him as holy, then I have chosen, it's going to be one or the other. I have chosen the ego as my teacher, and I will attack him. I will make him separate and different from me, one way or the other, rather than I desire our joining and I will see how we are the same. I just opened to this. It's not anything, well, it is in the chapter we've been reading, just a couple of sentences. When you meet anyone, remember it is a holy encounter. If I've chosen the Holy Spirit as my teacher, every encounter is a holy encounter by definition. If I've chosen the ego, every encounter is going to be adversarial in some way or other. My brother's going to annoy me in some way. He's going to seem to take my peace away in some way. So when I meet anyone, it's a holy encounter. As I see him, I will see myself. I'm either holy or I'm not. As I treat him, I will treat myself. As you think of him, you will think of yourself. Never forget this, for in him you will find yourself or lose yourself. So right there again is the importance of recognizing where our curriculums are. They're in our relationships with one another, not so much whether I had a thought about the weather or something else. Pay attention to how we are in our relationships, because having chosen the ego, we must attack in order to preserve our identity and our separation. And it doesn't look like attack always, but if it isn't holiness, it's an attack. What isn't love is murder, the Course says.
Where is that? Where were you just reading that from?
Page 142 in the Journey Back.
Where's the Journey Back?
Chapter 8.
Okay.
Chapter 8, page 142, and that's paragraph 4.
Journey Back, page 142?
Yeah.
Paragraph what?
Paragraph 4.
Okay.
Oh.
And that whole section is called the Holy Encounter.
So from the ego's point of view, every encounter is to meet somebody, put on the face of innocence like I'm a nice guy, but I'll find something in you immediately that I don't like, and that if you only fixed it, you'd feel better. And I'd probably feel better too, but you would feel better. So that like drivenness to constantly seek for judgments is what we have to look at in order to be willing to let it go, because it is such that's the disgusting part of it isn't like I'm preoccupied with minutia. The disgusting part is I'm preoccupied with pointing the finger at people, and that's what the minutia is for.
Yep, always.
And to get it, just to begin to get in touch with that as a possibility is like, ugh. At the bottom of page 223, he's talking about this. When we choose the ego, Well, paragraph 1, he says, the ego is certain that love is dangerous. I mean, do we go around consciously thinking love is dangerous? No, we go around consciously thinking we're looking for love in all the wrong places because it never works. But I mean, we think we're looking for love. We don't, I mean, but the unconscious thought here is love is dangerous. If I put down my fences between me and my neighbor, between me and my brother, not at the level of houses, but at the level of mind, if I put down this fence, the first obstacle to peace is desire to put up a fence and get rid of peace and keep peace fenced out. I don't want to connect with my brother because it's dangerous. I'll get hurt. And that's the irony of this unconscious thought. I mean, that's how ridiculous it is to say it out loud. And that's what Jesus is saying through the whole course. This is what we believe. We believe love is dangerous.
Yeah.
Well, no, I don't. Really? Well, yeah. And then he goes, this is always the ego's central teaching. But we're just not aware of it. Once we begin to admit that, we'll go, okay, well, that doesn't really work for me anymore. I don't like doing this. And then paragraph 2, line 5, for it is your mind, it is your decision maker that believes that love is dangerous and gives existence to this whole world that proves that love is dangerous. Yet it is also your mind, your decision maker, that has the power to deny the ego's existence. Meaning, I'm not this separated, vulnerable self. You're not this separated, vulnerable self. What if that's true? Am I willing to ask this presence called Jesus in this moment, whatever minutia it is I'm looking at, to just look beyond that? I don't have to dissect the minutia. I don't have to figure out why it happened and how it's affecting me. But what if I'm just willing to look beyond the whole thing?
Yeah. I was just thinking of the contrast of A Course in Miracles and its method of us finding who we truly are versus the method of the guru, as in the case of Mooji, is that Jesus is inviting us to make the decision for holiness and for you to be the guru. In other words, you be the guru because you want to remember your holiness. You have decided the Holy Spirit's your teacher, and you go into every single relationship inviting the brother before you to join you there in holiness. Now, you don't have to do anything, you don't have to say anything, but that's your conscious desire in your mind. Is the only way I am going to remember who I am, that I'm not separate, that I'm joined in holiness with my brother, is that I am a disciple of Jesus, if you will. I am just like him, and there's no distinction between his mind and my mind, and that's what I want. I want that in my relationships. I just saw this. The kingdom cannot be found alone. You cannot get it for yourself alone. And you who are the kingdom cannot find yourself alone. So it's, again, he is teaching us what he wants us to get over is the idea of separation through our desire for joining in every relationship. And of course, the joining is not about the bodies joining and, you know, doing things together. It's where am I in my mind? Am I truly choosing Jesus as my teacher, which means, you know, I become his hands, his feet, his eyes, his ears. I become the guru in the sense. So it's a different model. It's interesting that I've been going sort of back and forth watching Mooji work, but the idea is still there of the joining. You know, he invites the one in front of him to join him in a verbal way, in being out of time, out of body. So, wow.
We're coming, actually it's 10:30, but this is a series that Ken Wapnick did Journey Through the Text, and very similar to Journey Through the Workbook, except the way he develops his discussion of the text is he takes certain themes, atonement, forgiveness, healing, and he looks at the different places in each chapter that focus on that particular topic. So the reason I'm pointing this out is that there are many, many references, sections where in each chapter he looks at the power of the mind, or he literally looks at the topic of the decision maker. That's at least 3 times in this series. Or he looks at decision in general, this whole power of choice, always at all 3 synonymous: power of mind, power of choice, the decision-making part of the mind, all synonymous with the decision maker. That's where it's always trying to get us to go back to. And then as a closing meditation, Ken mentioned on this disc, the decision maker, he mentioned lesson 253. And it's the title, and it's on page 421 in the workbook, lesson 253. The title is "My Capital S Self is the Ruler of the Real Universe, the Real Universe of Heaven. My capital S Self is the ruler of that universe." And in this, he's trying to get us to move in the process, like this internal capital S Self is really our guru in that sense. That is really the voice of truth that's constantly speaking to us. In form, it seems to be Jesus or the Holy Spirit or both. The process is to take us back to that decision maker in our mind and be willing to listen to that voice for truth. And then that voice for truth is emanating from what our true self truly is in heaven. So he's kind of playing with those ideas in this lesson. So as a closing meditation, you want to read it? I can give it to you.
Yeah.
And then we'll get quiet for a couple minutes. I'll bring us out.
Myself, capital S, self. Myself, that is one with all, is the ruler of the universe. It is impossible that anything should come to me unbidden by myself. Even in this world, it is I who rule my destiny. What happens is what I desire. What does not occur is what I do not want to happen. This must I accept. For thus am I led past this world to my creations, children of my will, in heaven, where my holy self abides with them and him who has created me. You are the self whom you created, Son, creating like yourself and one with you. My self, which rules the universe, is but your will in perfect union with my own, which can but offer glad assent to yours, that it may be extended to itself. My self is ruler of the universe.
And gently come back.
I have an announcement or two.
Linda, are you still there or did you fall asleep?
I'm here.
Okay.
See her.
I know. She went poof, but she came back to visit, but she doesn't have a body anymore.
I wanted to make an announcement. The class on the manual for teachers on Tuesday, the subject matter is, what does it mean to be a teacher of God? What does it really mean to live and move as a teacher of God? And we moved that class to 9:30 instead of 10. So our classes are all consistent.
She needs face.
Hold on. So I invite you to drop in there if you can on Tuesdays at 9:30, the same system where we're discovering what it means for you to accept your role, your function as a teacher of God.
And we're having a workshop online, the same link on Saturday morning. So you're all invited to come to that workshop on Saturday morning. What covers, actually, it's Angela, who's one of the course immersion people, and Sue Wiggins. They're going to talk about the chart, the metaphysics, and then the basic process of forgiveness. So that's a couple hours on Saturday morning. If you're not doing anything, come by and visit online, or better yet, come to this. It'll be at the Rocky Mountain Miracle Center too. So you can come in person or online. It was something else. I don't remember what it is. Too much stuff going on. Anyway, Jeannie will be happy. It's the same time for both meetings now.
Oh, yes, yes.
And thank you, Dave. It was just good for me to listen to you when you were speaking, because it made me realize I'm really not so special. You've got you've got rats climbing onto your sinking ship too.
That's one of the ego's best tricks is to make us feel like there's something wrong with us, and it builds a wall and says, well, you're the only one who's got this kind of dysfunction.
Yes. Yes.
That's a real benefit of being honest and just sharing openly with each other, because you're right, we're not special. All of our stuff is really the same. It just takes a little bit of a different form, maybe.
I've heard that phrase, we're all moving chairs around on the deck of the Titanic. And I was thinking, well, we're freaking out about the rats on the Titanic, and we're all going down together.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
We think we're these things that are going to drown. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Linda, you still there?